Hey, SharePoint Dev Weekly, episode 54. So we are way halfway through to get to the 100 or something.
Almost.
That's how we calculate these things. Today is 13th of September, so last day of September, which is kind of wild as well. Autumn is really coming in, and Ignite is closing in, and then Christmas is closing in, and Thanksgiving is closing in, especially in the US. So this week we do have a visitor who actually can introduce himself. So who are you? Oh, why are you here? I'm always being so polite.
Why are you here? Well, we invited him. Like, well, what do you mean? Why is he?
Oh, that's true. I'm always doing the same mistake, right?
Yes. Every goddamn.
Well, yes. Never mind. So I'm Marc D Anderson. I've been working in the SharePoint space. I love SharePoint, and I've been working with it probably. I went out to Microsoft in 1999 and saw what was going to become Tahoe, and so my history goes pretty far back. And
sorry for interrupting. You said you went to Microsoft, so you were working at the Microsoft, or you visited Microsoft?
No, I visited. I was working for KPMG at the time, and we had a big knowledge management effort, and we were looking for a platform upon which to build it, and that was where we were headed. So that was. Yeah, so it's been a good long time, a good long run, but I've always been very passionate about the people who try to get things done either at the departmental level or the team level. You know, a lot of people we call citizen developers or power users, or essentially I've always tried to think about the middle, right? You've got end users and you've got developers, and there's this big empty space in the middle. And that middle is where a lot of interesting things happen.
Sure. Or I would actually say, it's almost like almost like a triangle. There's the IT pro, and then there's the dev, and then there's the end user. But to be fair, especially nowadays, a lot of people actually fall on the middle. They're not either one of them explicitly.
Well, but I guess even that, right? The term IT pro by itself is confusing, right? Because like to many folks, like especially in the past, it would mean admins. Like admins were the IT pros, right. But then at some point, like I recall that like I would do an IT pro exam on SharePoint 2013 or 2010, and I got all kinds of things like how do you set up this, how do you set up that, and there was like all the different things you could do as you Mark said once, the middle tier person.
Yeah.
Right. So basically, like. That wasn't an admin. So even from that point of view, IT pro meant non-dev actually. Right. A non-developer person.
Right. And those labels, all of them have always really, really bothered me because to me, we're all a little bit of everything. You know, sometimes we do one thing, sometimes we do another. In very large organizations, people get pigeonholed into those roles, and they often are not allowed to step out, which creates incredible inefficiency. So I'm not a big fan of that. I would rather have us all be, SharePoint people or something, Office 365 people, because we need to work together to get things done. And so if we're not willing to cross those boundaries, then I think we're setting ourselves up and our organizations up for failure, which is never good.
But I guess even there, right? So like even if you would say, like if I look at things that people can accomplish today in Excel or in Power Apps, like some of these, like I've seen people build games in Power Apps. Mm-hmm. Like if that is not dev, then I don't know what is. Right? There's physics in it, there's movement, there's everything. That is basically a fully fledged dev.
Well, that's why I think of it. That's why I think of it on a spectrum. It's a continuous function, not a discrete function, right?
Yeah.
We don't land in one of those 3 or 10 buckets. We have different, I have a closet full of hats, and I wear the hats that I need to wear when I need to wear them. And, I'd like to think I'm waiting for this renaissance of IT and I've been waiting for 35 years.
It will come. It will come.
It will come. I mean, yes, we work with technology, but the fact that we work with technology is just, it's the tools that we choose to use. We're really working with people. Yep. And so we need to have we need to bring all the skills that we have to bear to help make people happier in what they do, happier and more productive in their work. And so if we have to use 12 hats to make that happen, then that's a good thing.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
And then sometimes I look in my closet and I don't have one of those hats, and I reach out and I find somebody who has one of those hats. You know?
True.
So
True.
That's collaboration. Collaboration is not opening a Word document together. It's working together, and it happens to be in Word.
Yeah. And achieving something meaningful together, definitely. And even if you think about SharePoint is a good example from that perspective, that SharePoint is an awesome example on the fact that there is definitely no just dev people, because you need to understand many, many other aspects in SharePoint to be a successful dev. Even in a farm solution timeframe, you needed to actually understand a lot of more than just the APIs, right?
You're absolutely right, but there are so many places where people don't know that. They don't get that. You know, they'll outsource development to some people who know nothing about their process and nothing about their people, nothing about their culture, and they'll get some software back.
Yep.
And it's not what they needed. It may be what they wanted, but it's not what they needed.
Because they didn't know how to ask using the right terms with the other person and all of that, which comes back on understanding human beings. And truly, it's all about human communications, right? But even if you think about the SharePoint is, well, obviously all of this is super close to my heart, but the list view formatting and column formatting and view formatting is an awesome example. Is that dev or is it not dev? And it's kind of it actually falls, just briefly explaining this, technically from a marketing perspective, it falls right now in SharePoint, it falls on a non-dev. But all of our documentation is on the dev side of the house. And then we actually share a lot of the samples using GitHub for this non-dev audience, and that's completely mixing things. But I would say, why do we even differentiate? Why we need to say that you're a dev person versus non-dev, and a dev marketing and non-dev marketing, because it doesn't make any sense. But hey,
history.
Well,
a lot of that's
history. Yes, that's true. TechNet and MSDN. That was the old way of thinking in Microsoft.
And TechNet and MSDN, and then what about the people who use the stuff?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. So you know, at least now support.microsoft.com has content that's actually really good. At the time, there wasn't much of anything. You know, you'd click on that little help button and you'd land on a homepage of something that had nothing to do with it.
That's true. That is so true. Well, I think at the time when, like, 2007 version, we talked about this a few times in the SharePoint Dev Weekly as well. When 2007 version came out, nobody had any clue how big this would actually grow. So there was a bet, but it's like you don't want to bet end-to-end documentation until you understand that, oh, it is actually catching usage. Wow, that's cool. So, but now coming back on that, let's not actually dwell on historical things too much. Now, you basically then been an advocate for all of this kind of breaking the barriers and then really also bringing this new dimension, which is around governance, information architecture, which still does require some technical knowledge and understanding on a product. And back in spring, we started having a discussions together. But what have you started, and what is it, and what's the objectives?
Yeah, so you and I started talking about this, I think maybe back at MVP Summit in February, March or something.
Yeah.
But there always has been this big empty area in the middle in my mind. You know, I keep doing this with my hands because it's right here. And so you allowed me to start a repo under the on GitHub in the SharePoint space. There's a repo called SP Usage Docs. And the goal there is to have some of that documentation. Well, words on a screen, I'm not sure I want to call it documentation, that helps people who are in that middle zone, in the middle ground, do their jobs better. So how do we make sure that everyone understands the terminology? You know, so we have a glossary. How do we make sure that people understand in a little more depth what the most important building blocks of the platform are? You know, what is a content type? What is a site column? What is a site? Because when you talk to a developer, they toss out the word site, site collection, web, and it depends on what context you're talking about it, and it's very confusing.
Sure.
So trying to let people who are not developers or admins have a good way to talk about that stuff when they interact with the people who are more technical, they know the right words because they have to know how to ask for things the right way. I can't tell you how many times I've seen end users get shut down because they're using the words wrong, and the technical people just go, well, we already did that.
Yeah.
And maybe they didn't actually because they're just being jerks.
Or there's a different terminology what they're using. So and sure there might be the other options.
There may be a few people that anyway, so some definitional stuff. And then also let's help them make decisions. Like when should you use a team site? When should you use a communication site?
Yes.
That's not a technical question.
Sure.
That is a question that's based on what you're trying to accomplish, what your organization is like, what's going to be most successful for you over time. What are the things that you should be thinking about in order to make that decision well?
Yeah. Well, yes and no, right? Because if you are on premises, there's still this technical side to it, backups, dividing or associating site collections to databases, and how does that impact your DR and your recovery strategy and all that. So there is, depending where you are, again, it depends. There might be still this technical aspect to it.
But again, it's not a completely non-technical, but again, what you just said is basically covering options and explaining the implications, right?
Absolutely.
And the impact of the chosen information architecture, even to the DR level, is not something what we actually talk about in TechNet or in the technical documentation from Microsoft side. We basically say our classic technical documentation always says here's a functionality, this is how it works. We do not say when is it recommended to use that, and what are the options?
What is disaster recovery? Why should you think about it? What matters? Why does it matter to your organization? Because then when the IT people come and say, because of DR, we're shutting down your site today, or whatever they would say, at least you know what the hell they're talking about.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So you're right. There are always technical aspects to using a technical platform. But if we can make the people who are using it or who are trying to sort of bend it to its will smarter about how they can communicate with those more technical people, then everyone's going to win. Again, that's just raising the bar on the collaboration across all of the people who are working with the platform. I'm not trying to take. In Vesa, you and I have talked about this. We're not trying to take away from the effort to support developers and make sure that they have everything that they need. It's about trying to address the fact that there's been this gap, and it's been there for a long time. Like I said, support.microsoft.com is great. If I need to create a new team site. Well, there's a great article that says exactly how to do that from an end user perspective.
Sure.
But there's not necessarily an article that says, well, from an information architecture perspective, why would you do it one way or another? Or how would you make that team site more productive? Why would you use different document libraries instead of just the default one? That sort of stuff.
Yep. And even if you think about, let's say, the classic BMP, now that, in our mind, and there's multiple dimensions on all of this, but the classic BMP, which we use as our community term, is now kind of an extending on non-dev topics as part of this journey and all of the other things what we're doing on the side, which is great, by the way, because if we do have a functioning model and where we acknowledge to people who help each other, I think makes perfect sense. But even if you think about the early dawns of our, let's say, community engagement model on the dev side of the house, the reason why the BMP actually came to be quite popular was that our documentation, which was in a separate location in MSDN, which was historical reasons as well, which was kind of weird, but that actually concentrated on making things happen rather than what is it. So kind of it was all the time like, hey, document management, these are the options what you have, this is what it means, and this is what it means, and this is how it actually works. Have you considered following things? Which opens up a completely new set of, let's say, way of thinking, rather than saying something is right or wrong, because the old documentation was always, this is it, this is how it works. That's more factual based rather than conceptual based.
But I guess the trick part there is that, like, when you build a product, and that's an experience that I carry now, like, you're building a product for someone else. At that point, you can only say it's meant to do X, and this is how this works. You cannot, you don't have the real world experience from the field like how would you apply it? What are the different constraints and so forth and so on, right?
But that's
precisely
that's exactly what we're trying to capture here. So if you think about the beginnings of the whole P&P thing that Vesa brought to the table, it was from MCS, right? It was from doing consulting. So it was, we're actually using the platform this way. It doesn't matter whether it's exactly the way the product team thinks about it. You were solving business problems, and that's the important thing. And that's where some of the new functionality that's in the product right now comes from is, you get enough people using it in a certain weird way, then that weird way becomes an appealing new feature, right?
Which is true. It's weird, but it is 100% true. So, So if we can get the community who's out here doing good work with this stuff to start contributing to this documentation repo, I think we're gonna have some real gold in there. The tricky part is it's on GitHub, and so we're asking non-GitHubby people to learn a little bit about GitHub to contribute content. Though that seems to be going pretty well with the people who've volunteered. Yeah. And there's, by the way, good initiatives with David Warner, for example, helping people to learn the GitHub, just the basics. And this is how you submit a document, this is how you edit it. Because there clearly is a kind of I'm scared of doing that. No, click here, do that, submit, done, and that's it.
I found GitHub to be absolutely unintelligible for a good year when I should have been using it. It just didn't, push and pull was backward to me. And so just didn't get it, for the longest time. So it's not like everybody who's techie just gets it either.
Yep.
So, we want to support people to, maybe it's not the best platform for us to use to collect this stuff, but we have this big engine then, and we can connect to that.
Sure.
If we get to the point where we can start pushing this into docs.microsoft.com.
Yes.
The engine exists. So it's really the right place to do this, and I think we can support people through it.
Yep. And that's just to reiterate on that one, the absolutely the ultimate goal is that when we have a baseline of documents, we actually get all of this released as part of the docs.microsoft.com/SharePoint. Clearly call it out that it's documentation, kind of at this middle section documentation, speculative and all of that. And if people are looking let's say factual-based things, let's redirect in the right documentation as well. Now, what's, Mark, your response on the people who are saying, well, the blocks and MVP blocking has actually addressed this middle section tier, so why are we doing this now? So isn't this kind of reducing the value of these people? So
right.
What's with that?
Well, that's an interesting conversation because I've reached out to a bunch of MVPs who I think have a lot to say in this space, and of course they say, but I have a blog. They're not being uncooperative, but they're just sort of reasoning it through. I know with my blog, I'll publish something and I never touch it again. It was a point in time thing, and it was probably correct at that time, as correct as I could make it be. With this new repo, the hope is that because it's part of it's a living, breathing thing. So it will have enough people paying attention to it. It will be part of this larger engine, so we can take edit requests. We can have people suggest. I used to do it that way, but now I do it a different way. Should we add that as well? And so, we're starting out with content that is clearly contributed by an individual. Sue Hanley's article about team sites versus communication sites is a great one to have in there as an early one. But at some point, it may morph away from the point where it's really Sue's article. It will be an article about that stuff, and as it has morphed based on what the community input has been. Yeah. And so, that if we get to the point where that's what's happening, I'll feel really good about it, because getting the early contributions is great, but being able to keep it going and have that content change over time as our better practices change, as new parts of the product come out that would change the way we would make that decision. Team site versus communication site versus home site. At some point that will be another part of the discussion. So that article.
Absolutely. And that's a great way, definitely a great way of putting down.
Yeah. And you've told me that everyone who contributes to this repo is going to be rich and famous. So.
Absolutely. Okay. I have stickers and candy.
pay them or that you're gonna put their name up anywhere. But
no.
I think it's another great way for people to contribute to the community, right?
Absolutely.
You can speak at SharePoint Saturdays, you can blog, you can tweet, you can do.
Yes.
There are all kinds of different ways to contribute to this community, and if
Absolutely.
you have a writing bent at all, and I know some people who are actually very good writers who don't even have their own blogs.
Yep.
And we can give them a place to sort of exercise that muscle. That's awesome.
Absolutely. That's, by the way, a good point as well. Not all of the people who want to actually write something have a blog, and they're not willing to start a blog because that's an additional burden. Also, really, really important to call out is that all of the people who are contributing in this initiative will be explicitly called out as a contributor as well. So it is visible in the docs.microsoft.com when we get to that level. If we get this actually moving, we definitely need to start doing monthly summaries that these people actually contributed and all of that. Maybe we'll start with quarterly updates and saying that these are the people who contributed. So we're still kind of brainstorming to this together with Marc as well from that side of the house.
We sort of already have a set of founding contributors. I mean, people
Absolutely.
who were in there early. Veronica Geek is one of the people who contributed a couple of articles. She'll always be one of the early people, and so
yes, the history will be there as well. So absolutely, and we will definitely see some announcements maybe before Ignite related on at least getting some more wide communications around this. But Marc was already promoting this in his blog post as well. Now, Waldek, we haven't actually talked about this one too much with you. What's your thoughts at this point? We need to close up in a few minutes, but kind of
my thoughts on what?
On the whole thinking and initiative on this side of the house as well. So sorry putting on the spot without any.
No. So I like the idea a lot, and I mean like with anything else, like there are two parts to it. Like there's one actually doing the work, but two, to get it out there, to let everybody know that it's there, to let them, to help them to help us. And it's the same thing with CLI. It's the same thing with community generator, community controls, everything that we build. At the end of the day, we don't want it to be ours. I don't want CLI to be mine. I want CLI to be ours, built for community by community, because like if I at some point will change jobs or change my life, like do different things, I don't want us to stop, right?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
it will help others, and I want to basically start with that thought in mind, like how can I make it bigger than me, right? And I guess like for a big part, it's this, like we are all tech folks at heart, but now we're venturing kind of in the marketing space, if you like, right? Because it's more about evangelizing, advertising, talking about our work as opposed to doing our work. Sure, if you have a day, you can spend the whole day writing the articles, writing code. But then at the end of the day, it's still only you. Whereas if you spend half the day doing the work and the other half talking to others, like getting them energized, there will be two of you, and then maybe that two become four, and so forth and so on. So it's sometimes challenging to get into the mindset of how do I get it out? How do I reach others with that? Because I have this idea, I have this itch to scratch, but I bet that there are others that feel the same way. How do I reach them? Where are they? And how do I get them on board too?
Which, by the way, is an awesome discussion. And we agreed with Waldek earlier today that we're going to have that as a special topic week from now. So let's not actually dwell on that too much. We have to limit the length of these recordings because it's just getting out of control.
It is interesting, though, because the people who I would have expected to be first contributors to this aren't necessarily the people. I'm meeting new people. Yep. And I think that's awesome. This community is... Right.
Absolutely.
The best community in tech.
Absolutely. And just a summary of that kind of reiterates quickly on the Waldek's voice and your point as well. It is really around explaining to others the value or opportunities what you actually can help them or give your solution available so that they're interested on contributing on that or your articles and so on. So it's an interesting challenge. Absolutely. But let's talk about that explicitly a week from now. I have a meeting with my manager. I'm 2 minutes late from that, so this needs to happen. Thank you, Marc, and thank you for sharing the thoughts on this absolutely great initiative as well. We're looking into extending more and more on this non-dev side of the world as well. And all of the non-dev audience or dev audience, if you have ideas on how we can help your life, just let us know. That the objective for us is to make your life easier, because that makes everybody's life easier by sharing and enabling these things from our side of the house as well. But thank you, Marc. Thank you, Waldek.
Thanks for
Thank you, Marc.
Thank you. We'll be definitely in touch. Good. So let's actually get started on the article side of the house. And for those, if you're wondering, we did do the recording between Marc and the articles in a separate recording to save some time from Marc and Waldek and me from the evening. So
no, I mean, he was just here. He was here.
Oh, he was there?
Yes. Really? Yes.
Okay. At least virtually. Absolutely. Hopefully. Oh, well. Who knows? Anyway, so a few things from Microsoft side and community side for this week. So this one is really great from Mark Cashman in the SharePoint community blog or in a SharePoint blog, 4 top-notch teamwork tips for Teams plus SharePoint. And the whole point of this one is basically to show the power of SharePoint inside of the Teams as well, which actually has a lot of power. So obviously there's a native functionalities like the files, but making your company news and functionalities available, for example, in Microsoft Teams is super easy, already 100% supported. And if you use the Teams as the de facto, let's say, access point for information, it makes perfect sense to get the portals in here as well. So really cool stuff.
Cool.
Now, moving on the next one. So this one is from the Craft team, really great stuff as well. So Microsoft Craft Toolkit is now generally available. So this is the version 1.0 from the Craft Toolkit. It is basically a set of controls which are then connected to the Craft, and these absolutely work in the SharePoint context as well. So you can actually build SharePoint framework web parts and functionalities and experiences which are using these controls, but they didn't have to use them only on SharePoint. They work in any application in the world using web technologies, as long as there's the Craft access behind of the scenes. So really cool stuff. And I know that there's a lot of further investments in plans for these controls to make it really easy to use the Craft rather than just having an API, have actual controls. That makes a lot of sense. And
well yeah,
we've seen this with SharePoint, definitely.
Yeah, and I mean, you really appreciate the power of that and simplicity of that once you have done in the past the manual things like retrieving person profile, retrieving picture, and then having like all of that takes so much time. Whereas here you just drag and drop control and it's there and it's working, right? So it saves you so much time, allowing you to focus on the unique thing for your application as opposed to reinventing the wheel, doing the routine work.
True, absolutely, and that's something which we done in the SharePoint side, SharePoint framework side of the house with the reusable property controls and React controls, and we've seen a massive uptake on the implementation, because why would you implement all of that by yourself? Yeah, obviously these are using Fabric behind of the scenes as well.
Yeah, and I guess like on the SPFX side, like the perfect example of that is the control for taxonomy.
That's a
because there's
example.
So much work going behind it. There is no easy to use API. So just to get through that hoop and then show everything as a tree, it takes you so much time.
Yeah.
Whereas here you can just drag and drop a control and it's there already. It's working.
Absolutely. So please have a look on this. Great stuff from the Crafts team, and they will keep on adding new controls in the future as well. So this was just the one of these controls. So there's plenty of new stuff coming in the future as well.
Yeah, and also important part, you have to tell them what you like, what you miss,
Correct.
What you need.
Correct.
Because otherwise, like they will be trying to predict what people need, which might match your needs. But ideally, do reach out to them, tell them whether you like it or not, whether you miss anything, and what is the other things you would like to see in there.
Absolutely. Everything in Microsoft is driven by right now, and it should be. It's driven by usage, and we want to gain more usage to the functionalities what we promote and release. So how do we get usages that we fulfill the business requirements and technical requirements, which you have, but we need to know about those. So super important. Now, going then on the community side of the house, so again, SharePoint Saturdays, 2 SharePoint Saturdays on October 5th. First one in Boston. Well, not the first one. They are happening at the same time, I think, depending on the time zones. But anyway, so first one we'll cover today, exactly, is Boston. Boston has a separate official site, also in WordPress, a super list of speakers, absolutely, a lot of sponsors. And where was I think it was actually in here. If you go to the schedule, it is pretty wild. It is a free SharePoint and Office 365 or Microsoft 365 scoped conference, free. And there's 7 tracks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tracks. That's mind-blowing. And it's free for everybody to join. That's super cool and great topics, and definitely catching great things on our agenda. That's almost like a mini SharePoint conference or mini Ignite with 8 tracks side by side. And then on the Ottawa, there's also a SharePoint Saturday, and there's a good set of speakers here as well. A lot of familiar MVPs and a lot of familiar ISVs and system integrators available. So it's actually super cool to have well-known speakers in 2 different SharePoint Saturdays at the same time. To be fair, that was the same last Saturday because we had SharePoint Saturday Helsinki and Los Angeles at the same time. So that's potentially, you could have actually maybe done both if you would have actually taken the first hour in Helsinki, jumped to a plane and then flew to it. Anyway, so really great set of things. So there's 5 tracks in Ottawa as well. So that equals 13 different tracks on Saturday on SharePoint and Office 365, Microsoft 365 topics. That's wow. That's mind-blowing. It is an interesting community, absolutely. Now, one of the things that I wanted to also call out, and this one is mainly work done by Hugo Bernier. Absolutely brilliant work. We released this last week, and we're kind of promoting that now so people are aware of it. It is actually the easiest way to remember that. It's AKMS SPFX does web parts. And that will redirect you to this GitHub pages. And this is really for making it really easy to find different samples and what the community has built or engineering has built and shared out. So you can actually do something like compatibility, the SharePoint 2019 or Microsoft Teams, and you get the different samples which are demonstrating that functionality with different people. Apparently done something in here as well.
Yeah, apparently I was like, okay. Cool.
But really good example of a really great way of getting access on the latest samples, and please do give us feedback on this one. Right now, it doesn't have any database in the backend. It is actually every single thing what you see here is based on the information in GitHub, and we're trying to make it as simple as possible and looking into extending this model also to extensions so people can easily find the samples what they're looking for. But really cool stuff. Now, and thanks Hugo Bernier on that one. In here, this is from this random guy called Waldek. You want to talk about this?
Yeah, sure. Always. So I guess that the challenging part is that, like, over the course of years, from the GA until now, when we record this episode, we have versions of SPFX going from 1.0 to 1.9.1, right? And you might be wondering, okay, which version do I use? Like, do I always use the latest? And typically you would, unless you have to build something that also works on premises. Because on premises, you are locked to the version that is available with the version of server that you use, meaning for SP 2016, that is the 1.1.0, and for 2019, that is the 1.4.1. Yeah. Right? So in the end, yes, like there are this 1.4.0, but there are something from 4.1.
Right. Yeah.
So in the end, you have to start with the end in mind. Where will that thing that I want to build, where does that thing need to run? Is it online only, the latest? Is it 2019?
And what are the capabilities? What are you planning to use? So.
Exactly. And then on top of that, there's a difference between the framework itself versus the SharePoint framework Yeoman generator that we use to create a new project. because these are aligned, but then the latest version of generator can also create a project for SP 2016, which is then based on SPFX 1.1.0. And that brings us into this interesting discussion like, okay, so wait a minute. Generator 1.9.1 is now built on Node LTS v10 that didn't exist when SharePoint Framework 1.1 was made. So how will that work? Is it compatible? Will it work? Will I run into issues? So like all kind of interesting discussion, like should you always use the latest one? Or in the case where you need a project to run on 2016, wouldn't just be easier to get generator from then, the V11 generator, and use that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think we're offering NVM as one of the solutions, or the Docker files. Both are 100% valid solutions for being able to run side-by-side Node versions. If you want to stick on the matching version on that version without implications and all of that. So it's an interesting dilemma as well. So anyway, good article and good.
Thank you.
Good topics on that one. Now, this one is from April Dunham and around SharePoint list formatting tabs. She's been really active on contributing, for example, the list formatting samples, which we have in GitHub. So there's a lot of samples. There's again a new pull request coming in, 26 contributors. And if you go to view samples as an example, there's quite a nice set of samples available. And all of the samples, by the way, obviously have a screenshot out of it, so what you're getting and on all of that. So you don't need to figure out what am I actually getting from this sample? And in the April's case, this area is getting a lot of investments. So this is just a interesting blog post related on how do I actually add JavaScript on this the list view formatting templates, which actually is debatable. But again, what this one is doing is that we're embedding using SharePoint Framework application customizers or modern script editor web part to extend a script and the list views to have a script which is executing. Now, is that really the intended use of these things? Yeah, debatable. I would say what's interesting around this discussion is that the number one thing to understand is that yes, you can embed script in the modern SharePoint still, but you need to actually, there's a centralized control for those scripts. So in the tenant where you're installing them, there's a centralized approval process to allow that to happen, because in the classic SharePoint, it is a massive security threat to actually being able to embed any script in the world from internet to your site. So, and that's really one of the design decisions in the modern SharePoint. And in this case, we are then allowing scripts and installing a specific extensions, which then the list view command set is taking into advance, which debatable but interesting advanced scenario. So. Number one thing always is to understand what exactly is the implications of the chosen path, right?
Exactly. And I guess like with everything else in tech, it's hard to always know about it up front, right? Because you might have this particular need and you want to enable it for that, but then you weren't maybe aware of that there are 5 other implications possible,
Sure.
but you just didn't know about it because, well, you don't know what you do not know.
It wasn't mentioned on the blog post which you found using Google related on that
Stack
topic.
Overflow,
and
right?
Exactly.
It wasn't just Stack Overflow.
Yes. That's how it works, unfortunately. But let's move on things. So this one is from Yannick Reikman. Really good guidance on the SharePoint Online CSM exceptions. So when you're running code in the SharePoint Online as well, and you're getting CSM exceptions, please do log the information in a detailed level. So this one is a great example on getting all of the details, including the correlation ID, which those who've been in a farm solution era are aware, but our Microsoft support would really appreciate to have that ID logged, because then they can actually get access onto your last logs on that root issue. So when you report your then issue using, for example, Premier Support, you're able to say this tenant, this correlation ID, and that will enable then our support to actually help you. So super important thing. Now, this one is around the PnP SPFX generator led by Stefan Bauer. and the 1.10 is now out, and it actually has a lot of interesting data capabilities. So the Yeoman generator is extending the out-of-the-box generator, the 1.9.1, by having then a native support, for example, for bundling property controls and React controls, or jQuery or handlebars as part of the solution. So really great stuff from Stefan on leading this work. Well, he's been leading that for quite a long time, but it's a lot of valuable stuff for the partners and customers. It has the CLI inside of it as well.
Of course
it has.
Of course it has.
Now, related on Stefan, this one is actually something which this is on. Everybody can blame on me. There was a summer camps on SPFX summer camps, and those were led by because we didn't have community calls, but then AC led these few of these calls, and then on those calls there was cool demos. For example, this one from Stefan. It just took quite a long time for us to get these videos processed and published into YouTube channel, and now the demo he did is available from the summer camp. It is a really cool, let's say, SPFX web part, which you can then embed on a page, and it impacts and the styling and everything else. It takes that into account, and that's really Stefan's specialty as well. So make things look pretty, and that video is now available on YouTube. And it is really raining in your location.
Yes, it is. It is. Now again, just begun again raining.
Yeah.
It's pouring, seriously.
Yeah.
And I'm just here with the roof above me like a meter away. So like you hear probably, and I'm just on this size.
Once again, what happened was there's no background noise, no nothing. And all of a sudden, wow. Yeah, we're having a dark day, but not rainy day, at least for now. Anyway, moving on to the articles, clear Office 365 storage size with versioning. This one is from DevScope Ninjas, yes. And this basically is the fact that if you're worried about the storage, and sure, you might want to be worried about the storage in certain scenarios, you can control the amount of storage being used in the site collections by limiting the versions, and then making sure that well, you don't store unnecessary versions from let's say years and years in the past. I still remember that I had one customer who was having problems with their on-premises storage, and they had an unlimited versioning enabled, and basically it meant that after a few years there was like amount of storage eaten by these individual versions. So
yeah, and I guess that's being complicated. That there's also another side to it where when you edit files in browser or you have the auto save enabled,
yeah,
like every few minutes or so it will create the version.
Yes. On the other hand, if I'm completely not mistaken, I'm completely disconnected on the licensing. It's not anymore based on the storage. It's based on the actual account. So there's no like the storage is quite flexible.
But isn't there a limit on the OneDrive for business size?
OneDrive
like
for business, yeah, OneDrive, yes, there is. I don't think on the site collection level we're not anymore that strict. I like it's 2 terabytes or whatever. We don't really care. So.
I mean, there would be a lot of big Excel sheets with images.
That's true. That is true. Anyway, it's good to have guidance on available how to make that happen, and nice PowerShell script, which just out of curiosity is using PnP PowerShell as well, which I'm not surprised because that goes to the site level. So thank you, community, for the great work on that one. So this one is from Selected Tech. It is a podcast, a great podcast related on technologies, Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, Office 365, all of this stuff. SPFX web part with bot framework v4. And this is, I think it's Thomas and Stefan. Working about and explaining the implications and all of that. And this sample is available in the GitHub, and we will actually have also a video demo coming out on this one in the upcoming community calls. So it is available in the GitHub repos as well.
Yeah, and if you look at lower down, if you scroll down a little bit, there's the four people. There is Albert-Jan Schotle, Rick van Rausvold, Stefan Bisser, and Tommy Golles.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes.
So it's 4 of them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Cool. Now, this one, how to create a modern page templates and provision modern pages using them PnP PowerShell from Gautam. Gautam been really active recently as well. he's been active in the community for like decades already. He's super helpful on and contributes actively on the open source initiatives. But basically, it's all around how do we create those modern pages, how do we replicate and copy them, and how do we modify them using either code or using them PowerShell. So really nice blog post related on how to get started on these things, and references the different people and and how to make these things happen also. So really cool article. And I think this one is the picture where we have an out-of-the-box page template, but then that's his custom page template on the left side, which is then when you click and create a page based on that, it will have the default content inside of it, which seems to be lorem ipsum quite often that's being used. So. Here, Microsoft Flow handling file lock in SharePoint. So how do we handle file lock in SharePoint from Peter Venstre? And this nice story related on how do we integrate the SharePoint REST API calls and status checks on the SharePoint side of the house to the Microsoft Flow, and definitely widely used capabilities. So how do we check which of the things are checked out, and then having for example, a loop which is checking how many files or reporting all files which has been checked out in an Excel file potentially or CSV file. That's definitely useful for overall governance perspective. And then a final one, coming back on the Craft Toolkit, a lot of articles today. There's a lot of activities in the community, which is always great. So this one is from Siddharth, related on using the Microsoft Craft Toolkit within the SharePoint Framework web part. So how to get started on doing that, installing the toolkit to the solution, and also how do you actually implement that. Now, to be fair, in this case, the blog post goes and grants the permissions in Azure AD, but this is not actually needed. So you don't need to grant the permissions you don't need to go to the Azure AD to grant the permissions which you're requesting in the solution manifest, because you only have to go to the tenant admin, SharePoint admin UIs, and there's a simple UI to just grant or decline. So the grant, and that's it, and then you're good to go. Because if you do the same in Azure AD side, sure, you can, but it gets much more complicated to actually make that happen. So
yeah, and also oftentimes that requires different person to access, right?
Correct. In the enterprise level.
Oftentimes we see Azure being managed by a different group than SharePoint or Exchange.
Correct. Which, by the way, is one of the number one things why we implemented that capability in the SharePoint tenant admin UI. So because we know in the enterprise world, Azure is being typically managed by different people than Office 365. So having a full control on these capabilities in Office 365 level is a huge benefit, and unblocks people to use, for example, my Craft Toolkit in their implementations. So,
and also it's easier, right? Because if you think about all of Azure and all of AAD, like try to find one app for which we need to approve, like, and what do I approve? Like, what thing do I choose from a list of permission that is ever growing and ever expanding, because there are more and more app services being added. Whereas here you have like one simple thing, 3 permissions, click and approve or review. It's so easier to do it there as opposed to try to find needle in a stack of the Azure things.
True, absolutely. But that's it. A lot of articles today. Great discussion with Marc D Anderson as well. So let me stop the sharing. So we'll close up with 2 of us. And obviously, we did record the articles before the Marc D Anderson discussion. So now we're closing this after that discussion in video. So looks weird. Sounds weird. So
yeah, I have no idea. Like, what is your point exactly? Yeah, but like, Marc was a wonderful guest.
Exactly.
We had a great discussion with Marc. Anything else we can think of?
Awesome points. What are you planning to do this week, by the way? Just on your side of the house. Anything specific?
Yeah. So as I mentioned already the last time, we are working on an experiment that we're almost ready to start sharing with the rest of the world. So I don't think that we will be ready with this week, but this week is like the finishing touches.
Yeah.
So the last batches of work, trying to do all the things that will allow us to keep track, like how people use it, whether it's being used or not, what do they think of it, like let's say the basics that are really important from the product management point of view.
Yep.
And then probably the next week we'll start reaching out to people and, hey, are you interested in that? Because we think that might be valuable to you.
Yep.
So finishing work on that.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. I'm working on a new set of we pretty openly said that we're working on a new set of provisioning templates. So there's the Lookbook V2 designs coming out for the modern SharePoint, which by the way look brilliant. And then we're working on getting all of those templates available in the provisioning service and more better integration and make everything more seamless for people. And that's definitely the number one objective, what I need to clear. And this week, it won't be ready this week, but making sure that the steps and the planned announcements in Ignite and all of that is getting moving forward. So that's going to be, again, really cool. So having a really cool looking modern portals available with this click of a button in any tenant in the world. So really good.
Exactly. It's really nice. And any updates on SPFX V110?
Nothing what I want to. So yes, we're planning to make that happen. So there's certain features which definitely will go out in October. Now we're getting kind of this scheduling challenges related on upcoming Ignite and a few announcements in Ignite, which I can't really talk about too openly on this call yet, which is then pushing priorities. But there are plans to push some of the features which we talked about in community calls out in upcoming weeks. It's also related on timings on getting the feature rolled out worldwide on the thousands of the servers and all of that stuff. So because it's not just about the client side of on JavaScript files getting updated on the CDN. If that would be the case, that's always easy. But if there's server-side dependency, then that has to be rolled out worldwide, which complicates things. So, but quickly pinpointed maybe on that one. So the pre-allocation of spaces for application customizers, that's definitely coming out before Ignite, or we're planning to get it out before Ignite. So let's see. We mentioned that already in the last week in the community call. So let's see if we can get it out. So, but good stuff. Things are evolving. Things are moving. As long as the direction is good, so they might be always delayed, but as long as the direction, you're heading to the right direction, that's always good. So one step at a time. That's
absolutely.
Right. But thanks everybody for watching. Thanks for listening in the podcast side of the house. Thank you, and please do keep the feedback coming. We're getting more and more people being active on Twitter on the SPFX Dev Weekly tag, which is great. Remember to tag your blog posts and that stuff using the SPFX Dev Weekly, because it's really hard otherwise to find all of the things what people are doing, because we don't. To be honest, it's a time-consuming thing to find what's relevant.
Yeah, and also, I mean, again, we don't know what we do not know. Like, if we have never heard of you, well, then there's we don't Google or Bing every day. Like, okay, what is new in SPFX world, right?
That would be a great job. That, by the way, would be an awesome job, but there's no time for it, unfortunately. So please help us to help you, so to say.
Exactly.
So let us know. But thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll be back with a new webcast. And thank you, Mark. We'll be back with a new podcast. It's not a webcast. Vlog, blog, whatever, in a week.
Next week.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.